In 1931, before sunrise, a woman stood beside a small kitchen stove and lifted the lid from the family's coffee tin. Only a thin layer of grounds remained at the bottom. Her husband still had a long day ahead, and the children would soon be awake, but there was not enough coffee to make the kind of strong pot they remembered from better times. So she did what many careful cooks had learned to do. She warmed the pot first, measured every spoonful, and made sure none of the aroma escaped before the coffee reached the table. Across America, families were losing jobs, savings, homes, and the little comforts they had once taken for granted. Coffee was still part of the morning routine, but every bean had to work harder. Some households changed the way they brewed it. Others used eggshells, cloth bags, hot milk, roasted grain, chicory, or corn to make a plain cup go further. A few methods improved the flavor, a few protected the family budget, and some created drinks that looked like coffee but contained almost no coffee at all. Here are 25 forgotten poor man coffee tricks from the 1930s that almost no one uses anymore. Number 25. Warming the empty pot. The first trick began before a single coffee ground touched the water. A cold metal or enamel pot could steal heat from the fresh brew the moment boiling water entered it. That mattered when the kitchen was cold and the family could not afford to waste fuel reheating a weak pot again and again. Careful cooks poured a little boiling water into the empty coffee pot, swirled it around, and emptied it before brewing. The method helped the coffee stay hot longer and protected whatever flavor the grounds could produce. In a home where one small pot served several people, even a few extra minutes of heat mattered. The family may not have had much, but the coffee was still treated like something worth preparing properly. The next trick began not with the coffee, but with the water itself. Number 24. Starting with fresh cold water. When money was tight, using old water might seem harmless. But coffee made with water that had been sitting in a kettle overnight could taste flat before the grounds even had a chance to help. Period household guides often advise cooks to begin with fresh cold water. In a farmhouse, that might mean carrying a bucket from a pump. In a city apartment, it meant filling the kettle again instead of using what had been left on the stove. Fresh water helped cheap coffee taste cleaner and cost nothing beyond the effort of getting it. When a small amount of coffee was stretched across a large pot, there was no room for another source of bad flavor. The grounds were already being asked to do more than they should. But good water could not protect coffee that had already lost its smell in the tin. Number 23. Grinding only what the morning needed. Before pre-ground coffee became the only option in many homes, some families bought whole beans and ground only enough for the next pot. The reason was not fancy taste, it was protection. Once coffee was ground, more of it was exposed to the air. The aroma faded faster, especially in a warm kitchen where the tin sat close to the stove. Grinding only what the family needed helped the remaining beans keep their smell and flavor longer. The crank of a hand grinder became part of the morning soundscape. The beans cracked as someone slowly turned the handle beside the stove. For a household watching every penny, stale coffee was wasted value. Beans that kept their aroma made a small cup feel fuller. And some cooks found another way to make each bean give up more strength. Number 22. Making fine grounds work harder. Poor families could not create more coffee, but they could expose more of each bean to the water. A finer grind increased the surface area of the coffee. When matched with the right brewing method, it could produce a stronger cup from the same measured amount. Period cookbooks sometimes described finely ground coffee as more economical for exactly that reason. Grounds that were too fine for the pot could slip into the drink or create bitterness. The trick was to draw out more strength without turning the bottom of the cup muddy. That balance could help one tin last longer. If each spoonful produced a fuller flavor, the cook might use slightly less in every pot, without making the coffee look completely weak. But the grind had to match the equipment. The same coffee behaved very differently in a drip pot, percolator, or boiled brew. Number 21. Matching the grind to the pot. A struggling household could not afford to waste coffee by using the wrong grind. Fine coffee worked well in certain drip systems because the water passed through it once and collected the flavor quickly. Coarser grounds were often better for boiled or steeped coffee because they were less likely to escape into the cup. Percolators had their own needs. This was practical knowledge learned through trial. If water ran through too quickly, the coffee came out weak. If it sat too long against fine grounds, it became bitter. Either mistake meant wasting something the family had paid for. Cooks learned the sound of the pot, the color of the liquid, and the feel of the grind between their fingers. Those first 5 tricks helped families pull more flavor from every spoonful. But drawing flavor into the water was only half the problem. The next challenge was keeping it there. Number 20, measuring strength cup by cup. In a kitchen where coffee was expensive, guessing with the spoon could become a costly habit. Period recipes often gave different measurements for weak, medium, and strong coffee. A careful cook could decide how much strength the household truly needed before the first spoonful entered the pot. A stronger batch might be made for a worker leaving before dawn. A lighter pot might be served when several family members needed something warm with breakfast. The goal was not to cheat anyone, it was to stop coffee from disappearing through careless measuring. Some cooks kept the same spoon in the tin, others learned the amount by sight. This made a small supply predictable. The family could estimate whether the remaining grounds would last 3 mornings or 5. The next trick involved another kind of measurement, making sure the pot itself was not too large for the job. Number 19, brewing the pot at its proper size. A large percolator was designed to move water through a certain amount of coffee. Trying to make only a tiny batch in an oversized pot could produce poor results. The water might not circulate properly, the grounds could remain unevenly wet, the final drink might be weaker than expected, even though the family had used precious coffee to make it. Careful households learned to match the batch to the pot. If they had only enough coffee for a few cups, they used a smaller vessel when possible. If the big pot had to be used, they brewed close to the amount it was designed to handle. Small details protected a tight food budget because a badly brewed pot could not simply be replaced. Once the percolator began working, the cook still had to know when the coffee was ready and when it was beginning to ruin itself. Number 18, watching the glass cap turn. Amber, old percolators often had a small glass cap on top. As the water rose through the tube and washed over the grounds, the cook could watch the liquid change color. Darker did not always mean better. Over-percolated coffee could lose its aroma and develop a harsh, cooked taste. Experienced cooks lowered the heat once percolation began and watched both the clock and the color. The goal was a rich amber or brown liquid, not a pot that had boiled itself into bitterness. This was especially important when the beans were cheap. Low-cost coffee already had flaws. Long cooking only made those flaws stronger. If stories about the ways ordinary Americans survived hard times bring back memories, subscribe for more pieces of everyday history that almost disappeared. Once the coffee reached the right color, another step had to happen quickly. Number 17, pulling the basket before it turned bitter. A finished pot could still be ruined while it sat on the stove. When the coffee basket remained inside a percolator, the hot liquid continued touching the wet grounds. The longer it sat, the more bitter and rough the drink could become. Careful cooks removed the basket as soon as brewing finished. Removing the basket also kept stray grounds from falling into the drink. Unlike a modern automatic machine, a 1930s pot demanded attention while bread was sliced and breakfast packed into a lunch pail. Coffee could not be forgotten while children were being dressed or morning chores were being completed. A few distracted minutes could change a decent pot into something nobody wanted to drink. But even after the grounds were removed, the coffee's most valuable quality could still escape through one small opening. Number 16, plugging the spout with paper. This may be one of the strangest looking tricks in the entire countdown. Some household instructions advise cooks to keep the coffee pot tightly covered and temporarily plug the spout with paper, tissue, or a bit of cotton. The purpose was to stop steam and aroma from escaping before the coffee reached the table. A weak pot that held its aroma could seem fuller and fresher than one left open on the stove. In a cold kitchen, the plug also helped keep heat inside. The method required care. The plug was used after hard boiling and removed before pouring. Done properly, it protected heat and aroma at almost no cost. Those methods kept flavor inside the pot. But boiled coffee created another problem. It could be cloudy, muddy, and full of floating grounds. The next 5 tricks were designed to clean it up without throwing it away. Number 15, the muslin coffee bag. Before disposable paper filters became normal, a small cloth bag could do the same work again and again. Cooks placed ground coffee inside a bag made from muslin or cheesecloth, tied it closed, and lowered it into the pot. Water could reach the coffee, but most of the ground stayed trapped inside the cloth. The bag was emptied, rinsed, dried, and used again. In a household where scraps became patches or dish rags, turning cloth into a reusable coffee filter made perfect sense. It also left less sludge in the pot and fewer grounds in the cup. The method required no expensive machine and created almost no waste. Still, not every household brewed inside a bag. When loose grounds escaped into the liquid, another piece of cloth could rescue the finished coffee. Number 14, straining the pot through cheesecloth. Sometimes the coffee was already brewed before the cook realized how many grounds were floating inside it. Instead of discarding the pot, she could pour it through muslin, cheesecloth, or a fine wire strainer into another heated vessel. The cloth caught much of the grit and left a cleaner drink behind. This was different from using a coffee bag. The bag controlled the grounds during brewing. Straining was a repair made afterward, when the pot had already gone wrong. A careful cook warmed the second pot first and poured slowly. That kept the coffee from cooling during the rescue. The result was not restaurant coffee, but it was drinkable, and that was enough. The next method looked almost backward. After heating the coffee, cooks deliberately added something cold. Number 13, the cold water settle. Boiled coffee often left grounds floating near the surface. One old method for sending them to the bottom was to add a small amount of cold water when brewing was finished. The sudden change helped settle loose particles. After a short pause, the cook could pour carefully from the top, while much of the sediment remained below. The trick required no special filter or new pot, only a splash of cold water and a steady hand. After the ground settled, the pot had to be poured without shaking it. One careless movement could bring the muddy sediment back into the drink. For homes using boiled coffee because it required little equipment, this method made a rough brew more presentable. But some cooks used something left over from breakfast to clear the coffee even more effectively. Number 12, saving eggshells for the coffee pot. An eggshell looked like kitchen waste, but careful households often found another use for it. When a small amount of egg white remained clinging to the inside of the shell could be crushed and added to boiled coffee. As the coffee cooked, the remaining egg white helped collect fine particles and carry them away from the liquid. The shell did not make weak coffee stronger, it simply helped create a clearer cup with less grit. For families that wasted almost nothing, the logic was natural. The egg fed someone at breakfast, and its shell still performed another job. Later, the remaining shell might be placed in a garden or compost pile. But some recipes did not wait for a trace of egg white to remain inside the shell. They added the egg directly. Number 11, brewing coffee with egg white. This trick sounds as if breakfast accidentally fell into the coffee pot. Cooks mix ground coffee with beaten egg white and sometimes the crushed shell before adding water. As the pot heated, the egg helped bind tiny particles together. The solids settled, leaving the coffee above them clearer. The drink was poured carefully, so the strange-looking mixture stayed at the bottom. When eggs were available from a backyard flock or farm, the method improved boiled coffee without special equipment. The egg was not meant to flavor the drink. It was doing the work of a filter. So far, these methods help families protect and repair real coffee, but a plain cup could still feel disappointing. The next 5 tricks made it warmer, smoother, and more special. Number 10. Pouring it into a second hot pot. Coffee could continue cooking against the grounds even after it was ready. One way to stop that was to pour it into a clean, heated serving pot. The second pot did several jobs. It separated the drink from the grounds. It kept the coffee warm. And if the brewing vessel was stained or battered, it allowed the family to bring a more presentable pot to the table. This mattered when neighbors visited. A household might have very little, but hospitality still carried pride. The good cups came out, and the same inexpensive brew looked more inviting in a clean serving pot. The method transformed the moment without changing the coffee itself. When the family could not afford cream, another hot ingredient could make the cup feel fuller. Number 9, using hot milk when cream was missing. Cream made coffee taste rich, but many households could not keep it on hand. Period recipes often suggested hot or scalded milk as an alternative. The milk softened bitterness, added body, and kept the coffee hot instead of cooling it the way cold milk could. Whether the milk came from a delivery, a family cow, or a can, warming it made every spoonful count. The pale swirl softened the black coffee and made the cup feel more complete. This was not only a poverty trick. Plenty of households used hot milk because they liked it. But for a family without cream, it offered a little luxury without the extra cost. The next method went further by making milk half of the drink. Number 8, half coffee, half hot milk. Café au lait sounded elegant, but the basic idea was simple. Combine prepared coffee with an equal amount of hot milk. For a family with limited coffee but enough milk, this could turn a small, strong batch into more cups. It also made the drink easier for people who found black coffee too harsh. The key was starting with strong coffee. Served in large cups or bowls with bread, biscuits, or toast, the mixture became part of the meal instead of only a drink beside it. It was warm, smooth, and more filling than plain black coffee. When hot weather arrived, the remaining coffee in the pot could become a different kind of treat. Number 7, turning the remaining pot into iced coffee. Throwing away strong coffee at the end of breakfast made little sense in a careful kitchen. When the weather was hot, the remaining brew could be cooled and poured over cracked ice. Sugar or milk might be added if the household had them. Fancy recipes called for cream, but cold coffee, a little sweetness, and ice were enough. The trick protected leftovers while turning ordinary breakfast coffee into an afternoon treat. What had been a plain drink beside the morning stove now felt refreshing and different. But coffee could be used for more than another drink. A strong leftover cup could also become dessert. Number 6, turning strong coffee into coffee jelly. Coffee jelly offered a way to transform a small amount of strong coffee into something the entire family could share. The cook combined coffee with gelatin and sugar, then allowed it to set. The finished dessert could be served plain, with milk, or with a little cream if the family had some. Sugar and gelatin still cost money, so this was not an everyday dish in every poor home. But when available, they turned the last of the pot into a dessert that looked more generous than its simple parts. The same coffee that had warm breakfast could return later in an entirely different form. Until now, every trick still began with real coffee. But during the hardest week, some households faced a more basic problem. There was not enough coffee left to stretch. The final 5 begin where the coffee tin ends. Number 5, cereal drinks that only looked like coffee. Not every dark drink in a 1930s coffee cup came from a coffee bean. Commercial cereal beverages were made from roasted grains and other ingredients. When brewed, they produced a brown drink with a toasted smell that could stand in for coffee at breakfast. Some were marketed as healthy family beverages. Others became useful when real coffee was too expensive, unavailable, or being saved for adults who needed it before work. The flavor was different. A cereal drink could be nutty, mild, or slightly bitter, but it did not have the same depth as real coffee. Still, it was hot, familiar-looking, and easy to serve with bread or breakfast. For children, some households preferred these drinks to coffee. For adults, they could preserve the morning ritual when the real tin was nearly empty. Number 4, stretching coffee with chicory. Chicory had been used with coffee long before the Great Depression, especially in regions where its dark color and bitter roasted flavor were already familiar. During hard times, it offered another advantage. A family could blend roasted chicory with real coffee and make the coffee supply last longer. The cup still looked dark, and the chicory added enough bitterness to suggest strength. The taste was not identical. Chicory could be earthy, woody, or sharp. Some people loved it. Others accepted it only because it reduced the amount of coffee needed in each pot. The Depression did not invent this practice, but the lean years gave households a new reason to use it. Chicory was only one plant that could enter the grinder. Number 3, roasting barley for the coffee pot. Barley was familiar, inexpensive, and easier to find than imported coffee beans in many communities. To turn it into a coffee-like drink, The grain was roasted until dark, then ground and brewed. Roasting created a warm, nutty smell and gave the water a brown color. The result did not truly taste like coffee, but it could satisfy part of the same need. It was hot, it had a roasted flavor, it could be held in both hands on a cold morning and served beside bread or porridge. Some households drank roasted barley by itself. Others blended it with a smaller amount of real coffee or with other substitutes. The method showed how poor kitchens worked. An ordinary pantry grain was asked to become something entirely different. But another deeply American crop also found its way into the substitute mixture. Number 2, roasting corn to stretch the cup. Corn fed people in dozens of forms. It became meal, bread, mush, hominy, and sometimes part of a coffee substitute. The kernels could be roasted dark, ground, and mixed with other ingredients. Roasting changed the smell and color, giving the corn a deeper, toasted character that worked better in a dark breakfast drink. By itself, roasted corn was not coffee. It was milder and sweeter, and it lacked the familiar bitterness of the real bean. But combined with chicory, barley, or a little actual coffee, it added bulk and allowed the mixture to go further. That mattered because coffee depended on cash. Corn might already be growing near the house or stored from the harvest. The best-known Depression mixture did not rely on corn alone. It combined 3 inexpensive ingredients into a drink that carried the name of the era's hardship. Number 1, Hoover Coffee. At the top of the list is Hoover Coffee, a hard-time mixture made from barley, chicory, and corn. The ingredients were browned, ground, and brewed in place of coffee. A remembered formula used far more barley and corn than chicory because chicory supplied strong bitterness, while the grains provided most of the bulk. The name carried anger. During the Depression, struggling Americans attached President Herbert Hoover's name to shantytowns, empty pockets, thin blankets, and substitute foods. Calling the drink Hoover Coffee made clear that nobody considered it equal to the real thing. It looked dark in the cup. It gave off a roasted smell. It offered something hot before work, school, or another day of searching for employment. But anyone who knew real coffee could taste the difference. That was not the entire point. Hoover Coffee protected the ritual. The pot could still sit on the stove. Cups could still be placed on the table. A family could still begin the morning together with something warm in their hands. These 25 tricks were never really about creating gourmet coffee. They were about making a limited supply behave as if it were larger, smoother, warmer, or more special than it truly was. A heated pot protected the temperature. Fresh water protected the taste. Fine grinding and careful measuring protected the beans. Cloth, cold water, eggshells, and egg white rescued muddy coffee. Hot milk and a clean serving pot made a plain cup feel generous. And when real coffee disappeared, roasted grains, chicory, and corn kept the morning ritual alive. The 1930s forced families to become careful observers. They learned what could be reused, what could be improved, and what could be replaced. Nothing was too ordinary to deserve attention. Not a paper plug, a scrap of muslin, an eggshell, or the final spoonful at the bottom of a tin. Most of these methods faded as coffee became easier to buy and automatic machines took control of brewing. But the lesson behind them did not disappear. Luxury was not always expensive cream, imported beans, or a silver coffee service. Sometimes luxury was a warm cup before sunrise. Sometimes it was serving a guest from the good pot. And sometimes it was simply having enough of something dark and hot to place in every hand at the table.